Welcome to the show, and welcome to Glow So Bright. So I recently made an hour and 20-minute long video about why certain firearms owners and certain seemingly pro-gun groups out there are not necessarily that which supports the Second Amendment. And one of these, what I would talk about, is Fudds. Well, there is a new type of FUD out there, or one that I thought has gone extinct, and I thought they've stopped being a thing since the mid-2010s, about a decade ago. Well, I'm wrong. And this category would be the former law enforcement or military or retired law enforcement individual that ended up becoming a firearms instructor and would teach stuff out there with Doctrine straight up ripped from the assault weapons ban, and would have mediocre shooting skills and would demonstrate that and would be completely against any sort of new technology out there, such as slide-mounted reflex sights. So an example of that just came up recently would be by Joel Persinger, aka the Gun Guy, who has recently published a video on X or Twitter on April 16, 2026, titled New Video, The Stupid Use of Pistol Optics. So in his video, he would talk about the slide-mounted miniaturized red dot reflex sight, your pistol red dot sight, and how when he encounters shooters out there for California, like biannual, or what's it called, like once every 2 years, concealed weapons instruction and qualification, someone would just get one of these, puts on a handgun, and then would be very slow and unfamiliar in how to use it. So when a handgun is drawn and presented, the shooter would be optic focused and then would try and fish around to get a dot or reticle on the optic.
Optics. Pistol optics have their place, but it isn't all the time at every distance. This is what I see students do constantly, even during qualification for concealed carry permits. They've got an optic on their pistol, they can't find the dot, and then they discover, oh, it's not on. They search for the, come on, seriously, just point the gun, press the trigger, bang, easy peasy, right? It's only 3 to 5 yards away. There you go. At that distance, you do not need sights. You do not need optics. Point the gun the way you would your finger and press the trigger, and you're going to hit the bad guy.
And then he would advocate that, no, these things are not good for everyone, and if a target is up close, you need to actually go and engage in point shooting.
And to use sights where you would need sights when you cannot focus on the front sight because you're like me, you're getting old, and you just line up the 3 blurs. If that's the case, then use an optic. But close quarters fighting, there's 7 yards. I mean, I still see people do this at 3 yards, 5 yards, 7 yards, and I just tell them, look, point the gun, press the trigger. Point the gun, press the trigger, okay? And then they do it, and they go, I can't believe that worked.
However, this is a very obsolescent and dated type of technique out there, and he'd be called out on it. So why is this dumb? So one of the things that Joel Persinger would have stated in the video is that when a handgun is drawn, which is equipped with a slide-mounted reflex sight, is that the end user would try and fish around for it, or that the dot is missing. Well, it's just because of infamiliarity with the firearm, as well as a significant amount of user error, as well as a failure to maintain the firearm. Even if handguns are carried and never fired, they should be serviced and cleaned and maintained regularly. Humidity, lint, dust, and anything can cause issues with these handguns, and these need to be cleaned out and be properly lubricated. Also, another thing is that a red dot reflex sight, most models out there can have the battery last for at least a year, if not more, with good batteries. However, it is up to the end user to regularly maintain their equipment, as well as check the serviceability of their attachments, whether it be the batteries in a weapon-mounted light or the batteries inside of an optic. Another thing is that dirt, lint, and everything can obscure and fall into the lens or the emitter of these optics, and they need to be cleaned out with routine maintenance. Maintain your gear. It doesn't matter if it's shot a lot or if it's not shot at all. It needs to be regularly be maintained. And I've found shotguns that are hidden under beds. They were never fired for half a decade, if not more, but would be jammed up full of lint, crud, and would need to be cleaned out and detailed, stripped, and cleaned out. Another thing is that if you just do something for the first time out there, you need to have good instruction, have good index, and older techniques out there may not apply to new equipment. For example, in previous handgun doctrine out there, before the advent of slide-mounted reflex sights that are robust enough for duty use and are small enough to be concealed, is that quite often handguns would feature iron sights, typically in a format like this. You have your front sight, you have your rear sight, and you can use a flash front sight focus and use the front sight as an indexing point to then go and have sight alignment. This has been taught through a gun sight and through other American handgun techniques which derive itself from gun sight, and it's still an effective way to index an iron-sighted pistol to this day. Yet nowadays you have, with this, you don't necessarily need to use a front sight for there. I need to go from like a sighting focus to that of a target focus. And then just develop a very consistent draw through some repetition, through some training, through dry fire repetition. And there, typically I would just use the rear back plate or the hammer of a handgun, index that between my eyes or the front of my nose, and then just go and have a presented sight picture. And that's something that isn't really taught by FUDs from back then, and if it's conveyed to new and inexperienced shooters, they'll get the wrong idea on how to properly draw, aim, and use a handgun. Another thing out there would be the misnomer that reflex sights are only good for extended distances. They're good for almost all distances out there, including close ranges such as that of less than 3 yards. And even if the emitter is blocked, even if the front lens is blocked, you can still use the entire body of the reflex sight or use an alternative index point and have a pseudo-sighted picture, such as that of the rear backplate or hammer of a handgun, or using additional index points such as the slide in the frame. And through techniques and repetition training, that can be an alternative effective way of aimed fire, especially that of close ranges. And don't just take my word on it. Look at Ben Steger, who is a significantly better shooter than me, and he has demonstrated the effectiveness from all distances, from close distance to long distance, with a slide-mounted pistol red dot reflex sight on a semi-automatic handgun.
Whatever, you learn the shape of your housing, you square up the shape, and you're gonna find your dot. And even if you don't find your red dot there, when you're shooting at close range from a compromised position, you don't really need to see the red dot in order to get enough confirmation to hit the target. Again, just the outline of the housing can give you a lot of info. You're standing here close range, maybe 5 yards away. I've taped off the housing here so I get no dot of any kind, and I'm just gonna aim squaring up the housing on the target. Okay, now as you can see, I just squared up the housing, looked at my spot, and went ahead and sent a few, and it's like they go basically where I'm looking, in this case a little bit high, but again at close range it's like, yeah, that will work. Now there'll be other awkward positions too, like let's say it's like I'm down here, like the gun's down here. Again, I just get behind the reticle now and fire a few. Now I'm looking here and I got a center view of the box of the optic housing. My shots were just a little bit left, but I knew they're gonna go basically where I want. And that, again, that's without even seeing or using the red dot. So
And the only time I'd really advocate for using point shooting is if you don't have the ability to do so, or that you're incredibly close up to somebody at contact distance, or at extremely close to contact distance, only a few inches away, where that sights don't really matter. However, it has been proven for a long time throughout different areas, throughout different parts of the world, through different studies, throughout several decades, is that sighted shooting out there is significantly more effective than point shooting. And then when Ben Steger goes and calls him out for calling Joel a individual of high opinion yet low skill, then Joel goes nuts, and then just goes and accuses everyone who responds to him as keyboard warriors. Let's go take a look. So when Joel receives responses in the form of criticism and gets ratioed on X, and instead of taking the L, he goes and doubles down, makes a new video 2 days later called Calling All Keyboard Commandos. You're wrong. Point shooting and optics explained. And she would go and make a very long and drawn out video that if a new thing is introduced to an individual, such as a red dot slide mounted reflex sight being introduced to a new shooter, that they would perform poorly with it.
See if I can clear it up for you, okay? So first of all, pistol optics. No, I am not against the use of pistol optics. If anything, the opposite is true. Pistol optics can be extraordinarily successful for a lot of shooters, and they will help a lot of shooters improve in their combat shooting and their defensive shooting and their competitive shooting, for that matter, a lot, if they practice with them. And that was the point. Pistol optics can be very positive, can be, being the operative phrase, if you practice with it. It's a tool, not a magic talisman.
Well, of course it'd be performed poorly with it, especially if they're given instruction by an incompetent instructor that doesn't even know how to use the equipment or the object properly. If you seat me in a jet plane and not give me any instruction on how to fly and expect me to go and do some sort of combat sortie or some sort of flight with it, of course I'd perform poorly. But if I'm given the proper instruction by a competent instructor, I may be a competent person in operating the piece of equipment. Yeah, it's a very shocking idea. And then he would admit in the video that he is just simply optic focused and not target focused.
They're going to be looking at the guy that's running at them. And they're not going to be able to peel their eyes off of the threat to get it on the optic or on the sights.
And not using the thing properly. No, you need to be target focused, and then you'll be able to have a good sight picture and presentation using a reflex sight. Ben Steger, at the same day, would create a response video called Teaching Fudds to Find Their Dots, and then Steger would go and explain the basic core fundamentals on using a handgun, consistent grip, consistent indexing, and solid foundations.
It's not even the specifics of the advice. It's watching it. It was like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he doesn't understand what he's doing. All right, so let's talk about good shooting technique and what we want to do. What we strive to do is look at a spot and then index the gun on that spot, confirm the gun is indeed pointed where we want, and pull the trigger. Like, when I start hearing people like, oh, I got to acquire the dot from this, it's like, yeah, okay, they're probably not shooting in a target focused fashion, but it's like, that's the problem for me. It's not like an argument about the merits of point shooting. It's like giving people a good foundational understanding of what they're trying to do. And again, if you have a new shooter, like, puts the gun up like this, they're trying to engage a 5-yard target. It's like, oh, I can't find my dot. And you're like, listen, buddy, just pull the trigger. Like, that's not the habit you want them in.
Which Joel doesn't apparently explain or show clearly. He just says that, oh, new shooters, they don't know how to use a gun, therefore these are bad. Well, if you teach them properly and be competent, and to be competent in the first place, and then use the stuff properly, then these new shooters will have a path to be competent and be successful in the use and employment of a handgun. And if you can't do that, then what kind of instructor are you? So after Ben Steger's video, Joel Persinger goes and makes another response on Twitter. On April 19, 2026, this morning, he says, the tactical Timmies and keyboard commandos on X seem to have forgotten that the right to keep and bear arms applies to all Americans, even their 85-year-old grandmother who uses a walker, the 63-year-old gentleman with COPD and an oxygen bottle, the 22-year-old female college student confined to a wheelchair, and the countless other Americans with serious physical limitations. We've had all those students and many more. We adjust the training to fit the needs of the student. There's a reason my company is called Practical Defense Systems, not Tactical Defense Systems. Tactical Timmy and his keyboard commando friends just don't get it. What the hell does that supposed to mean? It's just a complete cope, a complete seethe and cope that you, Joel, are an incompetent handgun shooter and incompetent instructor. And would fail to just do the basic bare fundamentals of just consistent indexing, grip, and target focus using a reflex sight on a handgun. Like, this is just pure fuddery. Just because someone can promote or encourage the use of a red dot reflex sight and knows how to use it properly does not mean that they are against the Second Amendment. And it's just stupid, just a cope for just being bad. I mean, for this sort of stuff with these handgun reflex sights, I have less shots, I have less reps, I have less dry fire practice with a slide-mounted red dot sight, but I do it in an actual employment of shooting. I do it much more quickly, with much more competence, and with greater distance and accuracy. It's just being bad. And hey, I'm not a grandmaster, I'm not a B-class shooter or anything, and I don't really consider myself an expert in when it comes to handgun use. That'd be reserved to more competent people like Ben Stager, Matt Pranka, John Campbell, Logan, others out there that have shown that, hey, if you just apply the right fundamentals and just train and be competent with it, then you can be a good shooter. Not just some sort of cope that using this or being called out as a bad instructor means that you're against the Second Amendment. It's just stupid. Okay, with all that out of the way, what is my nuanced take on red dot sights on handguns? I find them to be great. I find that even with less reps, with less shooting time, with less dry fire practice, I can employ a handgun with a slide-mounted red dot sight more quickly, more accurately, more consistently. And I can more easily identify targets, whether they are something to shoot or to not shoot. And with iron sights with front sight focus, it is more difficult for me to do that. There are a few reasons why this would not be the most ideal thing for anyone. One would be the restraints of cost. A decent red dot sight out there would be at least $170, $180 or more. And then you need to go and have a handgun which can facilitate the mounting of that. Either a optics ready handgun or a modified handgun, which can be an additional cost. Finding more holsters for it can be a bit more difficult if it's a less common pattern of handgun. Another thing is that for everyday carry and citizen defense use is that the handgun itself offers more height. And with concealed carry, a few inches here and there, a few centimeters here and there can make the difference between being able to conceal the handgun and not, depending on your wear, your appearance, many other factors out there. Another thing is that for very tiny handguns, such as this .380 caliber Smith & Wesson Bodyguard 2.0, you can get red dot sights for this. You can dovetail it to the rear sight and replace the rear sight with a red dot sight. However, it increases the bulk of the handgun. I don't really find that to be necessary for very small applications where you just need a very small gun. And you can still be effective with iron sights. However, I find that when shooting or transitioning over to red dot from iron sights and with a little bit of adjustment, or when teaching new handgun shooters basic handgun safety and basic handgun shooting, I find that they learn more quickly, are more accurate, more consistent, and more quick when they're taught on how to use a red dot sight by a competent individual. An emphasis on competency out there. And I find that people who have some sight issues, whether with farsightedness and nearsightedness, I find that they can look at a red dot sight a bit more easily than that with iron sights. And I've taught basic handgun safety and instruction to the disabled and the elderly, and I find that they were actually more effective and learn more quickly with the red dot sight. And then when they go and bought their own handgun of their own, they got themselves a slide-mounted red dot reflex sight on a modern production handgun. So yeah, that's my take on this new sort of fuddery out there, and I thought it has gone extinct from the mid-2010s, but I'm wrong. Here I have an example of there. The has-been handgun instructor that had military or law enforcement experience and was teaching people from the time of the assault weapons ban, but has shown to be like outmatched by any competent modern shooter out there. Thank you for watching the Glow So Bright channel. Go and check out Ben Stager's videos. He's actually a good shooter and a competent person talking about this stuff. And if you ever find someone that copes about that someone is not for the Second Amendment because they're incompetent, they're not for the Second Amendment.